Partnered by Times Influence.
The first edition of the Aviation Insurance Symposium, in partnership with GIC Re and New India Assurance, presented by global insurance brokers, a first of its kind, managed to bring together all stakeholders on a common platform to highlight key policy initiatives. In this episode, we focus on the emerging risks and new age solutions in the aviation insurance sector.
Now, I believe I'm stating the obvious in saying that this country's civil aviation sector is flourishing, but it's also increasingly facing teething problems as well. So the question then becomes, if we are in fact poised to become the undisputed global market leader in the civil aviation sector, do we have the trained workforce to get there? And this particular topic is very personal and meaningful to me, so I wanted to engage the panelists myself this afternoon. So I ask that they please join me on stage. We have with us the Executive Director and Chief of Flight Safety at Air India, Harpreet Singh. Also joining us, the former Executive Director of Engineering at Air India, A.K. Matthew. And we have the Managing Director of Aerospace for the Europe, Middle East and Africa region at Willis Towers Watson, Peter Coyne. Now, in this sector, we often ask ourselves, what's required to take safety to the next level? Is it improved training? Is it increased implementation of safety management systems? Essentially, my first question with which I'd like to open to the panel, are we better poised for success if we depend on man or machine in this complex aviation sector? Harpreet, if I could start with you.
Man and machine, can we actually separate them is the question. And in my personal view, I don't think we can. Because in some areas, just machines can function independently to a large extent, which are the support systems, but you still need a man to monitor them. And that is why today we have not reached that point of technology where even in an aircraft, you still have two pilots, and you cannot really rely on only the system to take you from A to B. Aviation safety is resting on redundancy, a backup and a backup and a backup. So even when we talk about technology, you need a backup. When you talk about human beings, you need a backup. And they have to work in an integrated, cohesive manner to actually produce a safe result.
I'd love your take, sir.
Well, I think to open up to machines alone would be a big risk at this stage. I think the expectation is that whilst human error is common, I don't think you could solely rely on machines, certainly not at this stage.
Sir, if you could walk me through your thoughts.
Yeah, of late, the aircraft and the systems have become very complex. The manpower who is working on that, the engineers, the technicians, the support staff, all need to be trained on specific systems and specific areas, and also to train them in areas to follow the standard procedures. If they don't follow, it can be very catastrophic. So the training, the skill development is very important as far as aviation is concerned.
Well, let's talk about that training and that skill development. Now, it's been said that there's an acute shortage of talent in the aviation sector, be it on ground or in flight. How much truth is there to that statement? And if so, how do we eradicate the problem?
When there's such an expansion and there's such a growth, you need that many more people, not just as pilots. You need them as engineers, you need them on the ground, in your ramp, in the air traffic control, you need them in flight dispatch, and the list just goes on and on. So actually the skill sets that we require for each of these specific areas that we are talking about are quite critical to flight safety in general. And a lot of focus needs to be made on what kind of syllabi we are developing and what kind of motivation and encouragement we are giving to the general public to get into such kind of jobs.
I would love your take here, Peter. Now, is this perception problem, so to speak, limited to domestic shores, or have you encountered something similar in the context of your own country?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's probably the knowledge about what careers there are in the aviation industry is quite, it's limited. Certainly the concern from an insurance perspective, particularly with India, is we hear a lot about the rapid growth. We hear a lot about purchasing new aircraft, but the bigger concern for insurers is about the infrastructure and is about have you got the people there to support that, and throughout, not just pilots. Pilots is the easy question, but what about engineers? What about ramp crew? Everything. There's the exposure is increasing, there's more risk, and yet is there the infrastructure to support that?
No, absolutely. And now I'd like to talk about incentivization structures within the industry as it relates to safety. So, for example, in your view, could following safety norms or safety performance be more closely tied to insurance premiums to act as an incentive for the players in the aviation sector?
I think safety from an insurance perspective it's an expectation. High safety standards are expected. As far as having an incentive in terms of premium, I mean, premiums are largely driven by claims. If you're having claims, your premiums will be at a certain level. There's an expectation that you have the right safety standards. If you don't have the right safety standards, it's probably not going to impact premium. They just simply wouldn't write your business. So, it's a far more challenging environment.
That's a fascinating point, because airlines are battling multiple concerns. There's operational efficiency, the need to remain profitable. So how ultimately does a player in this ecosystem invest in its own safety? Is the industry doing enough to invest in its own safety?
I think every organization, whether it's an airline or an MRO or air traffic control, whatever, I think safety definitely remains one of their top priorities. I don't think anybody would do anything which would compromise safety intentionally. Now, I use the word intentionally because sometimes when you get committed to your business goals and you're so committed to that balance sheet that you're seeing in front of you, inadvertently you may, as a contributory factor, land up taking certain decisions at times which may not be fully in the interest of improving safety. The basic safety requirements are always there. But when we talk about raising the bar, it can happen. And that is why it's always good to have a watchdog in those big board level decisions, because what happens is the watchdog is actually going to tell the top management that these are the issues we are also facing. So before you take that final call, just review it accordingly.
Absolutely. From an insurance perspective, what are some of the most deep-rooted complexities that you encounter with your aviation clients that are perhaps unique to this industry and bottlenecks that don't exist in other industries?
That's a tricky one. I've only actually been in aviation, so I don't know much outside of that. But I think the difference is, from our perspective, that it's a global industry. And everything's moving. The passengers are moving, the aircraft are moving, vehicles around the aircraft are moving. So everything's so fluid. When we discuss internally with colleagues in other business areas, they're more localized. They have a less they have a more regional focus, whereas ours is truly international. Which also, I suppose, it gives us a good insight as well, though, because we can be if you like, a conduit for sharing information. Certainly when airlines come to us, we may say, oh, but we know an airline that does this. Have you thought about doing that? And I think we have an interesting insight into it.
This time, this conversation is really intended for all of you in the audience. So that said, I'd like to open it up for question and answer at this time. Do we have any questions from the audience? Sorry.
I am GP Gupta from SpiceJet. So this question is addressed to Mr. Preet. So now, implementation of SMS is mandatory in India. So what is your view as a country? So how far this SMS has been implemented in the country?
Okay, thank you for the question. How far it's implemented in India? I feel, looking at the airlines, everybody is in different phases of implementation. Air India is gone past that phase 4, so I know for us for sure, and I interact with some of our airlines, and I know they are in phase 3, some are in phase 4, some are in phase 2, because the regulation is giving you those phased approach. The Airport Authority of India is also pretty advanced in its SMS implementation. Various airports have their own SMS teams. What I feel the need of the hour is away from the regulatory mechanism to just get feedback from everybody, that we have an industry safety group which actually shares this kind of information amongst each other, because there's a lot that we learn. We have similar issues like our other airline, and there are airport issues which are common to all airlines. And if we can all sit together and brainstorm on what we could do further. In fact, we have spoken to 1 or 2 airlines informally already too, and I would be happy if SpiceJet is also part of that, because I think the need of the hour for the country is that we have not got an integrated platform. So we need to work on that, and we need to strengthen the system as a country.
Well, I think that's a lovely note to close on. This has been an extremely colorful conversation for me with such unique perspectives and really a fascinating back and forth. I have to thank all of these panelists for sharing so many anecdotes from their personal and professional journeys. A huge round of applause for them, please. And to present our panelists with, a small memento, if I could please ask Mrs. Reena Bhatnagar, General Manager with the General Insurance Corporation of India, to please distribute our gifts. Thank you, Ram. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Aviation Insurance Symposium 2018, brought to you in partnership with GIC Ray and New India Assurance, and of course, presented by Global Insurance Brokers Private Limited. Now, while the aviation industry may appear to be thriving, the threats to the industry are also multifold. Between shifting consumer preferences and an economic slowdown, what are ways in which players in the aviation ecosystem can adopt a new age approach to managing and mitigating risk? To address this very critical topic, fortunately, we're joined by a panel of subject matter experts. To navigate the conversation today, we have with us anchor and senior producer with the Times Network, Sumit Lakhutia. Huge round of applause, please. And joining him are thought leaders who include General Manager of GIC Ray, Devesh Srivastava. Chief Underwriting Officer at ICICI Lombard General Insurance, Sanjay Datta. And the Executive Director of Aerospace at Willis Towers Watson, Adam Hemingway. Thank you, gentlemen. Sumit, the floor is yours.
Without further ado, so let me start by what we're talking. So we'll be talking about the risks that the aviation industry has on hand, and some of the new age solutions that have been designed, innovated, evolved. Adam, I'd like to start with you on that. How have you seen the industry change? Because let's face it, one of the watershed moments, the kind of making and breaking moment of the aviation industry was 9/11 with what happened in America. How have things changed for the insurance space, in the aviation insurance space? How has that changed since then?
That's a very good point, and actually it's not just the aviation insurance space, but actually the insurance community on the whole, really. Since 9/11, we've seen the advent of actual terrorism, so, subdivisions of terrorism in the insurance industry. We've seen all the major brokers and insurance companies actually specialize in terrorism, and so we have individuals who actually research, respond, and effectively either look after or underwrite that risk, which in its own is its own class of insurance now. So something that perhaps before was more of an afterthought, or not necessarily an afterthought, but something that was perhaps included within other insurance policies, it now has its own policy within its own right.
And I'll come to you, Mr. Srivastava. Are you seeing this more often now amongst the sector, where people are focusing more on this? Because even after 9/11, recently we had, I think maybe it was a year or 2 years ago, one of the airlines, the Malaysian airline got shot down. Is this now more and more of a concern? Are a lot of conversations happening around this specific space?
Yes, certainly that was one incident that took the world by storm and set the cat amongst the pigeons of the claim settlers not knowing how to tackle this, and whether it's a hull loss or a terrorism loss. It led to a lot of internal debate that happened in the London market and also elsewhere in the world. Obviously, the consequences for the airline itself was disastrous, which obviously led to a fall in passenger revenue and the likes. So this is something that, yes, as the world gets more and more fragmented by such internal squabbles, yes, this is certainly in the airspace remains the same. So this is certainly something that would have to be addressed. Is being addressed, not that it hasn't been, but yes, it is certainly a matter of concern.
And Mr. Datta, I'd get you in on this. One incident happens and everybody is afraid or suddenly sits up and notices it. How much of a change do you see in, let's talk about the actual financials that happen. I mean, does a Malaysian airline aircraft being shot down impact the insurance rates for all other airlines or and every other industry?
That's a good question. If you really look at it, potentially, the world of terrorism and so many other aspects of, as Dave said, the international aspects of the business. Mumbai to New York and all of that is may not be totally present in all the other sectors of insurance which we deal with. A lot of it is local. All the other sectors. This is absolutely a global industry. Whoever operates in this industry. Having said that, the risks are global, and the good point is the industry is learned. Industry as a whole, the insurers and the reinsurers, the rest of the stakeholders have learned how to deal with all these risks. In fact, they could be kind of a template for resolving other risks. Which are the new emerging risks like cyber risk, standalone cyber risk.
Well, we started the panel on a very somber note. Our background also, as you can see, is thunder, lightning, rain, very dark. But we're moving now to a little bit on the brighter side, and I'll come to Adam for that about like what he said. There are risks. There have been unfortunate incidences, but the aviation space has kind of evolved, is now changing and taking things in the stride. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on maybe some products that are coming in in this space that are helping the aviation industry. Some kind of, how is the insurance industry tackling, evolving, changing with the times, moving ahead?
Yeah, I think the insurance industry has struggled somewhat over the last decade or two to innovate and provide solutions to clients. But actually, in the past few years, we've seen the advent of new products, which has been helpful. Talking in terms of the aviation industry, over the past 10 years, we've seen the volcanic ash cloud incident. We've seen outbreaks of SARS and Ebola, sort of unknown events that have caused major disruption to airlines. But we haven't necessarily seen products. We've seen people try to launch products in these areas, but we've not seen any become mainstream or take hold.
So Srivastava, your take, there is one, I remember, again, a couple of months ago or something, I believe it was one of the airlines, their reservation system kind of crashed. So those, is that something that when you're looking at cyber risk, is it only related to maybe the software that flies the plane or the software that maybe runs your airport or your ATC, or does they also, is it currently just covering everything? Would it cover this, the reservation system breaking down?
Tricky question to answer because the airlines are demanding it. That is their perennial demand, that business interruption sort of a thing ought to be covered. Whereas the insurers and the reinsurers therefore are resisting it. So it's there in certain measure. Certain airlines like Air New Zealand do have a business interruption component in their policy wordings. But the airline industry has been resenting it. But given the way rates have plummeted in the last few years, fortunately, despite that, we have still been able to hold that and not give a business interruption sort of a thing yet. But again, since the rates are holding on still, we are hopeful that such a cover may not be there in the immediate future.
Right.
Maybe sometime further ahead into the future, certainly that the airline industry would want.
Okay, that's an interesting point. We'll come to the audience for a couple of questions. If you have anything, if you could put your hands up, we'll get a mic across to you. and you can ask the panel any question that you have in mind.
Talking
Yeah.
about cyber security, it's a very important subject, so I'm glad it's being discussed here. And when we look at our safety requirements, actually, we have already flagged it as a high-risk item. Because when we look at our emergency response procedures, they do not really cater, as of today, a very comprehensive way. And what are you going to do if there's some cyber system failure, like the whole air traffic control is leading aircraft somewhere else, the systems get jammed. So I was just wondering, in the risk forum, some of the speakers here, since you brought up this subject, are you aware of any industry norms besides what we have from the Government of India on cyber security, which will facilitate a better preparation for handling such kind of cyber threats, you know, from the security as well as safety, both?
Lovely.
So
Yes.
I'll go on that. So I think this is a very good question. You know, exactly when I talked about a particular forum where all this is being discussed, you know, that's happening at the highest levels where intergovernmental, kind of teams are working on things along with all kinds of stakeholders. So there are lawyers there are insurers, there are corporates, large corporates, large, the corporates of every variety, aviation, manufacturing plants and all of that. They're all looking at this whole aspect of interconnectedness and, how do you handle it together. One of the key, for example, there's an electricity grid in the US. They do, simulated, cyber attacks there, which are managed cyber attacks to see what actually happens when you do these attacks, when you shut down certain things. They found very interesting, they found, discoveries which came after that were very interesting. The discovery was, and this is a big learning for the insurance industry, is, you actually, if you know this is likely to happen on the cyber front, you can have ways to tackle it. But what they found was when that particular, there was a diesel generating unit which was feeding into the grid. Because of this cyber attack, the diesel generating set went up in flames. It was a physical thing which went up in flames. Then, when they researched that, they found that all the safety, work, has been done by engineers in a certain era on the diesel generating sets, which did not include the whole thought around cyber attacks. So, they're getting into this whole issue when you build, safety across various industries, could be the manufacturing industry and all that. You have to bring in, cyber as an additional layer of thinking when you talk of safety. It's not about fire risk. It is not about, the other kinds of mechanical breakdown or whatever else. You have to build in cyber risk. So that's a great initiative taking place.
Thank you very much, Mr. Datta. Thank you, Mr. Srivastava. Thank you, Mr. Hemingway. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It was quite an interesting panel. My panelists have been able to bring out some interesting topics, and we'd just like you to give them a round of applause. Thank you so much. Thank you.
A completely unique perspective that you've just added to this conversation, and we thank you for that. And to extend a token of our gratitude to all of the panelists, may I please invite on stage S. Venkat, advisor to Air India, to please do the honors.
On next week's episode of the Aviation Insurance Symposium, we focus on the trends and threats in the aviation insurance sector.
Partnered by Times Influence.